Do you believe in spiritual oneness? Now, not in sameness, but do you believe in one spirit, one God, one spirit, call it whatever, that is the essence of all? Do you believe in one spirit? Do you believe in spiritual wholeness? Meaning that the spiritual self is whole, that wholeness is a state of being which is a reflection of the perfect spirit. Do you believe in spiritual wholeness? Do you believe in interconnectedness of being? That all being, all life, all creation is interconnected at some level. Do you believe in that? Do you believe that God is love and that your essence is love, that you are love? And that the ultimate purpose is love, is to be that love, perhaps in expression. So how many of you believe at least most of that? How many of you strive for that? How many of you have any gaps between your believing and your being that? And how many of you would say, yes, and that's why I'm here? Because I know it, and I'm on my path, and I'm on my path in the presence of other people. It's called commitment. And so we know these things, believe these things. I wholeheartedly believe these things. I believe these things with everything in me. And I do my best to be these things. To me, that's what life is about. And I also realize that in order for me to make that not just believing, a lot of people can tell you the scriptures they believe, the mantras they carry, the things we say we believe. But for me, I'm reaching a point in my life, it's like that doesn't matter so much for me. How are you being these days? How are you showing up in the world? How is it working for you? And how is it translating into, what we're doing and how we're being every day? And so realizing that we hold these aspirations, we have these beliefs, and these beliefs continue to be ever evolving, but it's really about the application of those beliefs. It's about living into them. Well, that's what there's a 4-week series that I'm beginning today, and we're going to look at this through a context of 4 ancient paths. There's 4 paths that are, the purpose of those paths or the practices are to unite us, that our beliefs and our actions can become congruent. These paths are also meant to help us to unite the individual soul with the universal soul. These 4 paths and 4 practices are also meant to help us as an individual self come to know ourselves as an expression of the ultimate source, to live true oneness. Now, these 4 pathways are ancient pathways. The title of the 4 pathways is found written in Sanskrit. The root of the word that describes them is spelled Y-U-J. It's pronounced huge, like huge, but remove the H if you would, huge. What you may or may not know is that in its translation, the root of the word huge, which means union, to unite, to bring into oneness. In our culture, the root of that word is commonly known as yoga. That at its essence, yoga is to bring into union. We often only understand a teeny small portion, which is about a posture on a mat. But yoga is about a movement of consciousness. It's about bringing oneself into alignment. And so these 4 ancient paths are known as the path of action, which is called karma yoga, the path of devotion, which is called bhakti yoga, the path of meditation, which is called raja yoga, and the path of realization, which is ultimate knowledge for ultimate truth, is called jnana yoga. Now, if you know me well enough, you know that I look at things through an interfaith context with roots in mystical Christianity. Mystical because it's very different from fundamental Christianity. Mystical is a oneness. And so we'll bring all of this back through different traditions, because if truth is ultimate, would it not be true that every true spiritual path would in some way be pointing us to that? And I think that's what you'll find as we embark on this for 4 weeks. And so the first one that we're going to be looking at, and again, remember that the ultimate purpose really begins in those questions that I ask. You believe in wholeness. You believe in spiritual oneness. You believe in interconnectedness. You believe these things. And how do we make it practical? How do we live it? So by embracing one path, we're going to look at one each week and really focus on it. Hopefully it will give us some tools and bring new level of awareness so that we can do what we feel like is our work and our opportunity to do. The first one is called the path of action. And again, it's about uniting our actions with our beliefs, and our soul with the universal soul, our self with the infinite self, call it God. Now, Jesus also was a teacher of these exact same things. He did not break it down and teach 4 paths of yoga, but he absolutely taught oneness. His parables were around oneness. They were about spiritual inheritance as your true identity and spiritual wholeness. He taught that our inner spirit would be reflected through outer demonstration, and he was always pointing us back to the spirit and the spirit of the law, remember, versus the letter of the law. He taught that it was through inner transformation we would really be vessels of light and what I would call instruments of God. And he taught us that when we had a pure heart, we would have much more to offer, because a pure heart is a heart that is free of judgment. It is free of expectation. It is free of anything other than being a presence that is there to express. So Jesus taught many of the same things when we look at the path of action. Also, if you look at many different sacred texts, you'll find what is referred to as the golden rule. It shows up in basically every major spiritual tradition. Do unto others as you would have them. And it's about our actions. So we know that all of these spiritual teachings are asking us to look at our actions. Look at your actions as a path and a practice to show you, are these actions taking me closer to what I believe and closer to my true nature, or are these actions actually creating some disconnect? Do unto others. One of the greatest parables, one of the greatest stories that's found in the Christian scriptures comes from the Gospel of Luke. There's a story that in today's translation, it's subtitled The Good Samaritan. Well, I can assure you that would not have been the original title, but you may remember the story as that. The story is found in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10. It starts with verse 29, and the story begins where a man, Jesus is teaching, and he's calling himself a rabbi. He's doing these things that are pretty radical, and people are trying to understand, and some people like it. Some people feel like he's turning upside down a lot of systems that the people invested in the systems don't necessarily want dismantled. He's telling people they can go straight to God without having to go through the priest or the temple. He's saying that, no, you can't only treat your people and your tribe like they're God's people. You have to treat all people and all tribes of people like they're the face of God. So he's really turning stuff up. So one day he's teaching that, and a person comes to him and says, Rabbi, I understand what you're saying in that the way to get into the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God consciousness, you could say, the way to enter into the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, is I'm to love the Lord my God with all my heart and to love my neighbor as myself. And Jesus said, yes, you've got it. But then the man said, so who exactly is my neighbor? Now that it's like, yeah, I know these things. I know this about love. And then now we start to narrow it down. That sounds pretty big. So help me understand exactly how far does that love have to go? Tell me exactly help me understand who's my neighbor. And Jesus, being a master teacher, told a story. And so this is where the story picks up after the question in Luke. He said, so let me tell you a story. A man was traveling on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. Now that audience would have gone, oh, if you've been to Maui, that's like traveling the road to Hana. Oh, it's a death wish. It's like the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, that audience would have said, oh, it's steep. It's got a lot of hairpins. A lot of bandits hang out there. A lot of people get robbed. It's a great place for a person to wind up hurt. So the audience that's what they're thinking when they hear he starts his story. There's a man who's going from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he's attacked by robbers who beat him. They take everything he's got. They even strip off his clothes and take it. And the people in the audience are like, yep, you traveled that road along. That's what's going to happen. And so Jesus said, and so a priest passed by and moves over to the other side and keeps on walking. Now, to most of us, we hear a minister pass by and kept walking, and we think that is disgusting. That's appalling. We're not quite sure exactly what it would have meant in their day. What we do know is that a lot of the temple laws, if the priest was en route and was doing some sort of ceremonial something or another, then he could not have allowed himself, he would not have wanted to become unclean. Because you see, to have stopped and to touch someone who was bleeding would have rendered you unclean, which meant you would have to go through a whole cleansing process before you could go back in the chapel. Some people say that's why the priest did that, but we don't know. All we do know is the priest didn't do anything to help the man. Then the scriptures say, and then a Levi passes by. He too crosses on over and keeps on going. Once again, we don't know for sure why. Levites often assisted in the temple. Maybe he too felt like he had to be somewhere more important. But the third one is the real clinker that they did not see coming. Now, first of all, I want you to understand that both of those would have really made the audience still think about it. Because even if I was dressed up in my robe, getting ready to go officiate a wedding, and I walked by someone who's laying there dying, do I have the right to pass them? In my heart, I do not. Sometimes it becomes a matter of, I'm the one here, this is an emergency, and this is just going to have to wait a minute. So they would be thinking those things, trying to unlock what he's wanting them to unlock. But then he says, then a Samaritan comes by. Now they would have gone, ugh. A Samaritan, in many of their eyes, was unclean, unfit. They did not have a pure bloodline. They were outsiders, less than. They were certainly not God's chosen people, and they were not to be touching us, and we sure didn't touch them. So in that audience, when he says, and so then a Samaritan comes, and they're probably thinking about, yeah, and the Samaritan turned around and ran away. But no, in the story he says, and the Samaritan tends to the wounds, got himself all involved. He picked the man up and put him on his horse. He took the man all the way into town, and he took him to be cared for. Then he told the doctor, after you care for him, here's some money, put him in the inn so he has a place to stay, and I'll come back and check on him. You can pretty well bet that audience would have been silent. There's no part of them that would have seen that coming. And it turned everything upside down. And so Jesus then looks at the man and said, so you ask, who is my neighbor? You tell me, based on that story, who was the neighbor? And the man said, the Samaritan. But the deeper question is this. I believe what Jesus really wanted them to get to is this. Sometimes you're so focused and you're asking, who is my neighbor? Who do I have to be nice to? Where do I have to forgive? Where must I extend my graciousness, and where can I just roll up the window and pretend I didn't see? Who is my neighbor? What Jesus flipped it around, and what he wanted them, and I believe us, to ask is this. Am I being a neighbor? In any situation, in any circumstance, whatever I encounter, what really matters is, am I being a neighbor? Would you say that with me? Am I being a neighbor? And then what does that look like to you? What does it feel like to you? And can you give yourself enough trust and belief that if we're doing our work to saying there's a path of action, a path of service, and a way of acting and serving and giving and showing up that is intended and is supposed to be able to help open me so that I'm truly living oneness and wholeness and in integrity. And so to begin to ask ourselves, how am I called to be a neighbor in this situation? What does it mean to be a neighbor here? And not to get so caught up and so overwhelmed that you feel like it's just impossible. Because I promise you, if you look out at the world, at all the people that need a good neighbor, neither you nor State Farm can take care of all the people that need a good neighbor. It's just, there's a lot of folks. We all need a good neighbor. But there's a powerful yet subtle thing here. It's that you don't lose sight of what's happening. But you have to always be saying, am I being a neighbor? Because if you get so caught up with who's my neighbor and what do they need and how's their need and blah, 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 and all of this and that, you're going to burn yourself out. You're going to spread yourself so thin, and you're going to run around chasing fires and trying to do so much good, you probably will wind up exhausted. But did you ever really know yourself as a good neighbor? Did you ever really know what it is to give selflessly? This path is called selfless service. Now, it does not mean that you never take yourself into consideration, because if you don't take yourself into consideration, there are serious consequences that benefits no one. So we're not saying that. You need boundaries. You need healthy ways of knowing how to give and knowing what's yours to do and what you can and cannot do. This does not preclude that. What selfless service is, it says that so much of our giving in our world is what we would call transactional giving. It's the nature of our world. It's the nature of our society. And it serves a purpose, a beneficial purpose. It's needed, but it's not meant to apply to everything. For example, I went to the grocery store the other day. I go into the grocery store, I want these things, then I give something in exchange. That's called a fair business transaction, right? You agree to do some work, perform a task, create something for some sort of compensation. That is a business transaction. That makes perfect sense. We do this for that. But what happens is that we do that in that setting, a right and a proper and appropriate setting, but we then allow the transactional nature of giving and acting to become a part of our nature, and we incorrectly believe that that's the only way to give or to show up or to take action. And so that's why spiritual teachings call us for selfless giving. It's another way, and I believe a perhaps better way to understand it is non-transactional giving. You give, you act, some action, some transaction, you show up, and you do what you can do because you're met with it in that moment, or because you've prayerfully thought about it and been guided to do it. Have any of you ever been guided to give or do something in a way you're like, is there anybody else up there I can talk to? I do not want to do that. Raise your hand if you've had it. Yes. Your conscience, it's like, yes, you need to do that to do the right thing. And the right thing, only you will determine what is right. We've never really experienced love until you've given love to be an expression of love. You see, love given in exchange for something is limited to conditional love. Christianity calls us into unconditional love. That means to be willing to give without conditions, without attachments, without stipulations, without transaction, unless it's obviously called for. And so it means that if I am going to go to the Boys and Girls Club and volunteer, and I'm going to serve food, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do that from my heart and serve, and that's what I want to do, it becomes conditional if I then start thinking, well, why didn't they come and show up too? Or we start resenting things around it. Can you feel the difference? So when we can really experience love and giving and taking our actions and showing up for the purpose of, I can be useful in this way. If I am giving and showing up in a loving way without expectation, can you now begin to see the pure heart and the pure channel that it flows through? You become an instrument of love. And what you experience is a far greater benefit than anyone could pay you for or reciprocate in return, because what you get is the sheer joy of being in a state of wholeness, being the state of love and expression. Is that making sense? It's in some ways, it's just a little bit of a shift, but when we really begin to see it that way, it truly opens things up incredibly. So much of our giving, or the way we show up, our actions, a lot of times we just don't think about it. Reality TV is a popular thing now, or reality internet show. You know what a reality television show is, where they follow somebody around and you're inside of their life. You really see how they live. Just imagine if I said, next week, we have created something amazing. We have camera crew elves. I know we found them. We have camera crew elves who are going to follow you around all week, and they're going to film everything you do. Would anybody be happy? Even if we said they're not going to film, some things, but they're going to film your actions, your choices, your interactions, your transactions. All of that stuff's going to be on film for the whole world to see. Would you think a little bit more? Would you call forth your better angels? You betcha you would. If you knew you had a camera crew, cameras all over your house watching everything, that level of awareness would cause us to pause and act from a different place. Now, see, these paths and these practices are meant to do the same thing, not by some outside pressure because somebody's watching you, somebody has to, but because you want to. I want to begin to pay attention to how I'm showing up, how my actions are making a difference. When we begin to show up differently, we also begin to realize that even though that's not happening and what you're doing is not being broadcast on television, spiritual law tells us that everything we do is being broadcast. What we are sowing, our actions, our thought, what we are sowing, it also says we are what? Reaping, which means whatever we're sowing, we're broadcasting. It's going out there. All of us, it's going out there. And so why not give more consideration to what we are putting out there? And to really put our best self out so that we can understand what it feels like. So often in our actions, in our giving, it does become transactional without even thinking about it. We're looking or expecting something in return, even if not the first time or second or third we did it, but if we do it a few times, then we start expecting some sort of return. We're looking for approval or praise or validation or recognition or attention. We're looking for a specific reward, some kind of outcome. Maybe we're doing these actions because we want to keep the peace. We want to avoid criticism. We want to keep out from under some kind of pressure. We want to meet some obligation. Maybe we even want to earn spiritual brownie points. But bringing awareness to Why am I doing the things that I do? So there's 3 things that I would like for us to consider this week about selfless giving, non-transactional giving, extending a hand, a kind word, listening, doing something that you feel guided to do, and being intentional and looking for opportunities and really noticing, what was I expecting? What was I hoping for? Do I have any attachments to what I want them to do to it, with it, how I wanted them to react? Do I have a little sense of, resentment? And it's not about beating yourself up, it's about noticing. Because in the noticing is where we can begin to let go and begin to experience, what does it feel like to give, to take some action for the purpose of being an expression of that gift, of that energy, of that you put forth. 3, the first is true giving is not an exchange, it is an expression. True giving is not an exchange, it is an expression, and it facilitates pure expression. True giving is not an exchange, it is an expression. Would you say that with me? True giving is not an exchange, it is an expression. True story. This wasn't me, but a guy. A friend invited me to the opening of a charitable organization. I sat in and listened to the impressive speeches, and I had a delicious meal. When the rest of the program finished and the donation box was being passed around, I sheepishly pulled out a worn-out $5 bill from my pocket, folded it, and dropped it in so no one could see it. Just then, the person behind me tapped me on the shoulder and handed me a $100 bill. I smiled at the generosity and then majestically looked around and got that bag, and I waved it high so everyone would notice what I was stretching to put in. With such feeling of pride, I then turned around and said, "Thank you." And the guy said, "Don't mention it, but just be more careful. It fell out of your pocket." The man ended his blog by saying, "Thus began my lesson in giving and the true spirit of generosity." It's not an exchange. That's why Jesus told the little widow who gave the equivalent basically of a penny. He pointed to her and said, "She gave the greatest gift." And they're like, "She did not. I gave more than she did, and she did not." But what he was pointing to was she gave from a spirit of generosity. She gave not worrying about, is it enough? Is it good enough? Do you know one of the biggest things that holds us back from taking the actions that we could take and from giving what we could give is comparison. It's not enough. It won't measure up. It won't make a difference. Those are the words of the ego that are telling us that, no, it's not enough. I don't compare. And so we tend to compare so much we don't give. Or we place conditions and expectations, or we just cop out, we just tune out and don't pay attention. Or we give, but we complain and whine, and we never really let go. We kind of stay attached to it even where it went. Or we have what we call selective caring and giving. Oh, I'm free and happy to care and to give about these, but not about them. And so again, it's to hold ourselves in gentleness and being willing to realize this next one is, so number 1, true giving is not an exchange, it's an expression. Number 2, the purpose of selfless giving or non-transactional giving is to remove the obstacles to love that are in your consciousness. To remove the obstacles of love that are in your consciousness. I'll give you a bit of an embarrassing but true example. I teach a class periodically called Sacred Abundance. The last time I taught that class was, I believe, 2019, before COVID. It's a 7-week class, and about week 3, some people are smiling who were in that class, they remember. About week 3, everybody in the class gets a surprise. They get a $10 bill. including me, the teacher. And it's part of our assignment. Give that freely. You can make something with it. You can add to it. Just be creative and be guided. Pray about it. Think about it. And let your spirit guide you to give this in a way for the purpose of for you to feel like what experience it feels like to give it. And we asked people to write about what that experience felt like. Some people said, I didn't even like having it because then I had the responsibility. And then I started worrying about would I give it to the right people? If I added money, how much money should I add? Some people came back to they're like, I don't even want it. Take it back. So it was a great exercise. And so me too, I have it. So I've got my $10, and I'm in Ingles one day shopping, and I saw some beautiful orchids. And I felt something that said, get that. And I knew I'd have to add a little money, which was fine, but I'm like, get an orchid, because you're going to give that to someone. That's going to be what you do. You give. I was so excited. I love orchids. I bought it. I got it home. Next morning in my meditation time, my prayer time, I'm praying, okay, Holy Spirit, who do I give this to? Boom. The face appeared to me. I'm like, You laugh, but it's true. There's like maybe 2 or 3 people on the earth that could have brought that out of me, and that was one of the faces. And I'm like, okay, oh, kumbaya, Lord, kumbaya, kumbaya, Lord, kumbaya. Let's try it again. Lord, who am I supposed to give this to? Boom. I'm like, oh, God. It was our neighbors across the street. Now, they said, who could be what? Love you. Who could be watching this? It was a neighbor, literally the house across the street. So Tia, my partner's female, when we bought our house, when we moved in, the neighbors were fine, but these one particular neighbors, they just were mean. I mean, not even just like not nice, but they were mean. and you know, so we would try little gestures, but it was the kind of thing like if you'd run into them in the grocery store, you'd be like, hey, they would literally look straight and wouldn't acknowledge anything. If you were in the yard and you go to the mailbox and they're in the mailbox, how are you today? And I'm just not used to that. I don't know what to do with it. And so I just had said, you know what? I'm going to honor their space and just not look at it, although they're right across the street neighbors. So now you can understand. Here I am with an orchid. Who am I supposed to give this to, Lord? Your neighbors. Well, it gets funnier. So I'm like, oh my God, I told Tia, and she's like, ha ha, ha, that's spirit. She's like, I'm giving my $10 back. I'm not even going to ask. So I pray about it, and I've got like a knot in my stomach, and I'm sweating, and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to go over there. I had rehearsed how I was going to do it and what I was going to say, and I rehearsed it a lot, and so I felt pretty good about it. I made up my mind. I kind of knew their patterns, and I had it timed when I would do it. So earlier that day, I was taking my dog for a walk, and just so happened there was another neighbor out across the street, the neighbor that I would have loved to have taken it to. Master gardener, we had so much in common, so I'm talking to Susan, this neighbor, and in the course of conversation, she said, yeah, I am getting their mail. They left earlier this week. They're on a 3-week cruise. I'm like, they're on a 3-week cruise? I excuse myself. Oh, they're on a 3-week cruise. She's like, yeah, they're going for 3 weeks. I was so happy. I thought, you know, an orchid can live for 3 weeks, but if I put it in the dark and don't give it water, I don't know if it'll make it. Well, I had to commit. I'm going to do my best to take care of that orchid. And this is where it got kind of sketchy. I'm like, God, now, who is my neighbor? If they come back and the orchid is kind of dead looking, do you still want me to carry it over there? Do I need to get another one? What are we supposed to do here? So the class is going on, and I kid you not, just to make it funny, that the next week when I taught that class, orchids had shown up here. No one in the class had put them there. As it turned out, we tracked it down like a month later. A lady in the church just saw some orchids and thought it would be good to put them in here that day. So they kept showing up. So what began to happen, they weren't there. I was so relieved. But I dedicated prayer every day. Sarah, would you come give me that song? And what I began to realize was I had said, that's just them. I'm doing my best not to take it personal. If they don't want to interact, I'm just going to stop trying to interact. It's, not for me to push myself. But I was still carrying expectations for how they should be. Are you hearing me? I was still carrying, it was little, but I had some judgments, some thoughts about people shouldn't show up that way. That's rude. And I was putting that on them. And so as I began to pray, and my prayers for them really were, I just saw them wherever they were, enjoying themselves and light flowing through them. And as the days and week 1, week 2, week 3 went by, time was getting near. I knew they'd soon be coming back, and I could feel a change in me. I was now actually looking forward to it. I really had changed and reached to that point. And I heard my beautiful spirit say, this was never for them anyway. This was for you. You see, what selfless love is about, it's not about them. But let me tell you, it affects them. But it's about you. It's about you and me beginning to move those things out that sometimes we don't even know they're there. But if I've got some expectations around how you should be showing up, then my heart is not pure and wide open to express freely. It really can't be otherwise. I can't carry judgments and stones and expectations and resentments and be available to be a pure channel. Give for the purpose of giving. And so true giving is not an exchange, is it an expression? The purpose of this kind of giving is to remove the obstacles to love that are in your consciousness, in your heart, in your being. And so do that which takes you closer to your true nature. That's number 3. The quickest test, the litmus test you can ask yourself with anything you're doing, will this take me closer to my true nature, love? Will it? And if not, try not to do it. Give yourself some more space. It's not an exchange, it's an expression. May I remove the obstacles within my mind, my heart, to love. And may I do that which takes me closer to my true nature. Now the final piece, this is May 5th, it's the first Sunday in May. This year at Unity is about a year of influence, and so every month we've been giving you a challenge, an invitation for something to do. Last month, I hope you engaged, and we were wearing these bands, and for 21 days we were doing what? No complaints. And we switched it every time we noticed ourselves complaining to remind us. So we still have more of these. You may want to pick up one of these. These can remind you to give and do for the purpose of giving and doing. So what May's challenge is make it better, make it beautiful. Make it better, make it beautiful. For the month of May, think about ways and things that you can do wherever you are. Make it better, make it beautiful. Do something useful. Make it better, make it beautiful. How many of you are willing to spend some time thinking about non-transactional giving and actions and how you can elevate that in your life? And are you willing to work with us in May, and let's make some things better and make some things beautiful? All right. Let's anchor this into a time of prayer. Sarah, would you lead us in that song?
These hands can build a road, heal a heart, and move mountains. These hands can change the world
These hands can build a road, heal a heart, or move mountains. These hands can change the world, for these are the hands of God. So back to the story of the neighbor. So the neighbors came back. I never did take the flower over because I was clear it was complete, but something shifted. Not only did it shift in me, but it shifted in them. Because when I saw them, when they came back, they were unpacking their car for the first time in years. And then they moved. It's the truth. True story. Love you guys if you're watching. And I have the friendliest neighbor across the street now. It's quite interesting. So I'm telling you, when we begin to move these things out, things happen. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes for just a moment. Holy Spirit, we give thanks for the laughter and for the love and for the realization. We give thanks for the recognition that these things that we say that we believe, we say that we believe them because we feel them as an ancient echo from within our bones that rises up to remind us of our true being, our true nature, our true calling, that we are love and God is love and all are an expression of that love. And as we move into that space of love to become instruments of love for the sheer purpose of being the presence of love, then all else will surround itself and organize itself around love, for love is the organizing, harmonizing principle. And when love takes center stage, all else will align. So may we bring awareness to our heart. May we bring the kind of attentiveness that as if we were being watched, but may we call forth that inner observer of our being to create some space to make our best choices. To know that, no, we can't save the whole world, and we're not asked to. But what we are asked to do is to learn how to show up without attachment, without expectation, without anything other than for the sheer purpose of being that in expression. And so we give thanks for those opportunities that come before us where we may experience it. We give thanks for the growth that takes place within us each time we be that in expression. And we honor each and every person in this room and on this path and in this world, whether they know it or not, that is what they are here to do. So let us be in this together with love that we may be love. So these hands can build a road, heal a heart, or move mountains. These hands can change the world, for these are the hands of God. Would you please stand? Sing it out. These hands can build a road, heal a heart, or move mountains. These hands can change the world, for these are the hands of God. Hold them up, last line. These